If you've ever felt like the system wasn't built for you, like fertility coverage, support, resources are out of reach, then, my friend, you are not alone. In today's episode, we're sitting down with Ryan Ferrante, and he is someone you want to know because not only is he a former infertility patient, but also a father through surrogacy, passionate advocate, and now a surrogacy attorney with years of expertise in helping people build their families. And together, we're going to hear from him about why Illinois is setting the new standard for family building rights. We talk about how groundbreaking fertility mandates, expanded protections for LGBTQ families, and relentless advocacy efforts are reshaping what's possible for intended parents like you. If you've ever wondered about the overwhelming cost of surrogacy, how you're going to grapple with it, why this insurance that you're paying for every month isn't doing more, and if change is even possible, then this conversation is going to leave you feeling empowered and inspired to believe that it is. You're listening to Surrogacy Made Simple with Dr. Alyssa Small Layne, your host. Thank you so much for joining us on the Surrogacy Made Simple podcast. I'd love for you to share a little bit about who you are and what your connection to the fertility world is.
First of all, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to inform your audience and others about what they need to be thinking about if they're pursuing some sort of third-party reproduction or assisted reproduction. My name is Ryan Ferrante. I am an attorney in Chicago. I founded my own practice in third-party reproduction or collaborative reproduction. It goes by many names. After my own experience with infertility about 10 years ago. My wife and I were treated for infertility and finally became parents when our children were carried by a gestational surrogate in Tallahassee, Florida. Most of my free time when I'm not busy with my own practice is spent working on advocacy on behalf of the infertility community and for the protection of reproductive rights. I am the state captain for Illinois for the efforts of Resolve, the National Infertility Association, and the American Society for Reproductive Medicine's efforts to request support from Congress on family building issues, protecting IVF, and expanding access to care. Prior to that, I led the efforts of advocates from all 50 states as the co-chair of Resolve's Federal Advocacy Day, which is an event that was previously held in person on Capitol Hill, but it's now done virtually post-COVID. And I'm also on the Legal Advisory Committee for Men Having Babies, which is a nonprofit dedicated to providing gay men with educational and financial support to achieve parenthood through egg donation and surrogacy. If I'm not on a Little League baseball field with my son, I'm usually focused on those efforts.
So you have your hands in a lot of places related to fertility, infertility, and reproductive rights. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
What makes you so passionate about this?
A lot of that comes from my previous career, which there wasn't a whole lot of passion in it. I used to be a corporate tax attorney. And then when my wife and I went through our infertility experience, I met with the folks at Resolve because I wanted to understand, for me and my wife, Lindsay, how were we going to pay for this? Where was the support resources that we were going to need as we went through this? Because for us, it wasn't just the infertility treatment itself. It was then a pivot to understanding, how does surrogacy work? How do the laws apply? How do we find a surrogate? And so I suppose I did with what any lawyer does, is I just threw myself into the law. I tried to understand the diversity of laws across the states because we didn't know where our surrogate was going to live. We were here in Chicago, and of course, everybody else, I think we hoped that our surrogate was going to live right down the street, which never happens. And we worked with an agency. I was working in corporate tax, and I was going back and forth from Chicago to New York every week, which is not ideal for a couple who is experiencing infertility to be apart from each other. And I stepped away from that career and started my own practice in third-party reproduction. That was back in 2016, 2017. And then I volunteered for Resolve. I wanted to go to Capitol Hill. I wanted to explain the impact that the lack of resources and the inadequacy of fertility coverage impacted my wife and I as we were exhausting all of our resources to have a family, which just didn't seem right. Now, I should mention my wife and I were incredibly lucky. Our employers at the time provided us with a infertility benefit. It was a $25,000 lifetime benefit. We exhausted her benefits from her employer, and then we exhausted mine. Obviously, that doesn't cover everything. And so,
Wow.
in addition to being counsel to intended parents and surrogates and donors and anyone else involved in the third party reproduction process, I didn't understand why every lawyer who practices in this area wasn't figuring out ways to advocate for their clients. If we purport to represent the best interests of our clients when they are our clients, I feel we should be doing it before they're our clients. I raised my hand. I told Resolve I wanted to advocate. I went to the last in-person advocacy day
Advocacy.
in 2019, and I volunteered for the volunteer committee, and then eventually the co-chair for 2 years, organizing those efforts to pitch Congress on not just protecting access to care, but expanding it, right? I think maybe we find ourselves right now in this current environment with this protection mode, but we haven't lost sight of the expansion that's necessary to your audience and others who need access to care and the benefits necessary to pay for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's so interesting how conversations have changed a little bit because we connected back in the summer and our connection was really about expansion, not knowing what was going to happen in the political landscape a few
Sure.
months later. But speaking about expansion, there have been more and more states which are increasing fertility benefits. And we saw that this year, but also Illinois has really been at the forefront of expanding coverage benefits for people for fertility. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like in Illinois now?
Sure. I think a little bit of historical background might be necessary just to understand
Excellent.
how we got to this moment. I think all of this is colored by the fact that Illinois is this shining city on a hill when it comes to reproductive rights. They've always been proactive instead of reactive. Governor Pritzker and the Illinois legislature have done a very good job of that. They're always anticipating further restrictions. And so a lot of the movement that we've seen in Illinois over the last few years has been in anticipation of shrinking protections. Okay. So just to put into sort of historical context some of the things that have happened all over the United States versus what's happened in Illinois, everyone knows the Dobbs decision in 2022, in which the United States Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution does not protect the right to an abortion. And so in January of 2023, Governor Pritzker put into place an interstate shield law. This law protects healthcare providers, patients, and anyone helping patients from losing their licenses or facing legal actions from other states. Okay. So we've seen
Oh.
some of those long arm type of reaches by other states to say, if you go to another state, not in Illinois. And so those protections are here in Illinois for anyone coming to Illinois. And then in February of 2024, we obviously had the Alabama Supreme Court decision, the ruling that embryos are children under the wrongful death of a minor statute. And so what Illinois has done is they've been proactive in protecting the people from Illinois from that type of Supreme Court ruling. Okay. This is all in tandem with other advocacy organizations like the American Society for Reproductive Medicine has expanded the definition of infertility, which has been a critical movement for patients from all states. I think we discussed it a little bit earlier before we started recording, but there's only 21 states plus the District of Columbia that has a mandate in some form for insurance coverage for infertility, meaning there has to be some benefit provided in those states, obviously with certain restrictions. Even here in Illinois, we have some exemptions that are quite problematic. And even of those 21 plus DC, only 8 have policies that are inclusive of LGBTQ plus communities and single intended parents. And so what they've done in Illinois, which has been incredibly helpful, is they've adopted some of the similar language that the ASRM has in defining infertility as far more inclusive. Okay, so the previous definition of infertility from ASRM, Illinois had something similar with it was a limited definition of infertility as the inability to conceive after 1 year of unprotected sexual intercourse. It was a sort of a restrictive heteronormative definition that denied coverage to many LGBTQ plus patients who wanted to start their families here in Illinois. But even before ASRM acted, even before ASRM expanded their definition, back on January 1st, 2022, there was a change of the definition of infertility in the Illinois Insurance Code, specifically, this, I don't want to turn this into a law school class, but it's Public Act 102-0170. The act updated the definition of infertility here in Illinois to be a disease, a condition, or a status characterized by, number one, a failure to establish a pregnancy or to carry a pregnancy to live birth after 12 months of regular unprotected sexual intercourse if the woman is 35 years of age or younger, or, here's the new part, or after 6 months if the woman is over the age of 35. That was far more inclusive than it used to be.
It was only 2021?
The post age 35 piece. Here's the important part. Or a person's inability to reproduce either as a single individual or with a partner without medical intervention, obviously far more inclusive of same-sex couples, or a licensed physician's findings based on a patient's medical, sexual, and reproductive history, et cetera, et cetera. So the expansion of the mandate ensured that single persons who don't have a partner or LGBTQ plus people are not discriminated against in accessing infertility treatment insurance coverage. And so it's
Family building resources.
a very progressive approach. And now Illinois has continued to, the Illinois legislature has continued to try to protect and expand wherever they can. I think what's really important as a foundational piece is to really try and understand, how do individuals or couples get coverage for infertility, whether it be provided by an Illinois-based company or otherwise. The first step really is to understand whether insurance will cover the medical treatment to diagnose and treat the inability to have children. Okay. I mentioned ASRM. They're an influential organization. This is medical professionals, mental health professionals, and lawyers. They had always defined infertility as when a man and woman can't get pregnant, right?
Yes.
After a year of unprotected intercourse. In 2023, ASRM redefined infertility. They now define the condition of infertility as the inability to get pregnant because of the patient's medical, sexual, and reproductive history. Or, here's the new, very important development. This is going to sound familiar. The need for medical intervention such as donor eggs or sperm to achieve a pregnancy. So ASRM has said, when there is a third party involved, when there is a third party that is necessary, that is infertility. This was an enormous step. This was an infertility earthquake when it comes to the influence that ASRM has on persuading insurance companies to start covering these types of things. It was long overdue, right?
100%.
This more inclusive language is now applying to anyone who needs help having children because of relationship status or gender identity or sexual orientation. They redefined their guidance because there was clearly an issue with getting access to treatment for certain causes of infertility other than just unprotected sexual intercourse. This should have been obvious before 2023, but better late than never. The decision by ASRM was an enormous step towards broader insurance coverage of fertility services like egg freezing and IVF for all people who need help starting their families, not just heterosexual couples.
Exactly. And that resonates with so many people coming to surrogacy because there's many pathways. So some people, a lot of people actually think that surrogacy is just for couples that are infertile who can't get pregnant between each other's. But then you have a whole nother category, people that shouldn't get pregnant because of a medical condition or it's really unsafe for them or the pregnancy because of their condition or medications that they have, or
Yeah.
they're a single person, or it's like a dual male couple, or a dual female couple where
Mm-hmm.
one of them has one of these other issues going on. And it's such a wide group of people who come to surrogacy, and not everybody is given all these different resources that they need to be able to have the family that they want in an
Yep.
affordable, efficient way.
Yep.
Wonderful.
So you mentioned surrogacy, and I think this is an
Yes.
important piece that is sometimes overlooked. What we've discussed to this point is the treatment of infertility by way of embryo creation or some other infertility treatment that would result in the patient, the covered person, having an embryo transferred to them. Okay.
Yes.
Surrogacy is, there's layers to this, right? Everything that we've talked about is about the embryo creation. Now that we've got the embryos created, they need to go somewhere, right? And so when you engage a gestational surrogate, what is the impact of the insurance or any of the protections that we've talked about now? Not much yet, frankly, because the surrogate is not a covered person under your policy, right? Your surrogate, like the one who carried for Lindsay, and I'll continue to use her as an example instead of one of my clients, she lived in Florida. She lived in Tallahassee, Florida. Now, the insurance that the surrogate has to cover her during a pregnancy is generally not used until she gets released to her OB because she's under the care of the reproductive endocrinologist during the transfer of the embryo and then through a couple of months following the embryo transfer until the reproductive endocrinologist is comfortable releasing her to her obstetrician. Okay. At that point, she needs health insurance to cover the pregnancy, to cover all pregnancy related medical expenses. What is sometimes surprising to intended parents is that when they get to that stage, the surrogate's health insurance may not be what we refer to as surrogacy friendly. Okay.
What does that mean? What is
Yeah.
surrogacy-friendly insurance?
Okay. In its simplest terms, insurance that will cover her as if the pregnancy was her own. It will say, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, the insurance contracts are quite cumbersome, but they may say something like this: the covered person, meaning the surrogate, will not be covered for pregnancy related expenses when acting as a gestational carrier. Oh no. What are we going to do here? There needs to be an insurance policy in place that does not exclude surrogacy. Now, there are independent experts out there who are going to review policies for intended parents and their surrogates who make a determination whether or not this policy is going to cover a surrogacy pregnancy. Insurance coverage like TRICARE or many other insurance policies are not going to cover a surrogate during a surrogacy pregnancy. But there are many policies that will cover a surrogate as if the pregnancy was her own. Back to our definition of surrogacy-friendly insurance. I'm sure you want this podcast to be evergreen, but in the middle of December, this is the time when intended parents are going out and securing insurance coverage for their surrogates because you can get it through the Affordable Care Act. If you're engaged with a surrogate and she doesn't have surrogacy-friendly insurance, right now, yesterday was the time to go out and get it. Because otherwise, after that open enrollment window closes, you're in a situation now where securing insurance for her is going to be far more expensive. The question I get all the time is, does my insurance as an intended parent cover my surrogate? No, she's not a covered person under your policy. I've seen some really unique situations where employers have provided benefits that say that the surrogate can become a covered person. I think I've seen that once. can be a covered person under the intended parent's insurance policy. That is incredibly generous in relation to other insurance coverage. But otherwise, the bottom line here is this. If the surrogate does not, if her existing insurance policy is not surrogacy friendly, you got to go get something. Okay. And right now, during the open enrollment window, is the prime time to do it. But sometimes, and my colleagues and I have differences on this as to what we see. I see about 50% of the time a surrogate's existing insurance will cover a surrogacy pregnancy. The other 50% of the time, something needs to be secured. So it's a coin flip as to the insurance coverage that a surrogate is going to have when she comes to the table prior to an analysis of whether or not her insurance will cover the pregnancy.
And that's something that not a lot of intended parents realize at first when they're coming to this. One may not know that their personal insurance isn't going to cover a separate person who is pregnant. And they may not know that just because your surrogate has insurance, that it may not cover her pregnancy care, meaning her OBGYN for her prenatal visits, labor and delivery, all of that sort of thing while she is pregnant carrying somebody else's baby.
Mm-hmm.
But you did mention that there are some unique unicorn insurances which will cover, and I have heard
Yeah.
some whispers about some of those. There's one in particular from New Jersey, like a very unique situation there where a lot more is covered than what people expect. But most of us are not in that situation, unfortunately. And maybe the trend will go that way, but it's not that way now. But something that
I'll just make a comment on that real quick. Thousands of surrogacy arrangements that I've worked on that happen one time.
exactly.
So
Very much a unicorn situation. Something I was interested in hopefully weighing in on is that with some of the changes in Illinois' insurance laws, that there is expanded coverage for some of the medical procedures that a surrogate could undergo. So from my very much lay understanding of this, something like the embryo transfer to the surrogate could be covered
could
with
be.
certain Illinois insurances. You said could be.
Yep. Could
And
be.
things like potentially medical screening or the things that a woman would need to undergo for IVF, embryo transfer, if she was doing it in herself. If you're doing that to a surrogate, it
Mm-hmm.
may be covered under Illinois insurance. Is that correct?
Possible. Yeah, it's possible. As I mentioned before, always in Illinois, at least what we've seen is that they've been very proactive to expanding this. They don't celebrate their wins. They're always, whenever the Illinois legislature expands access to care, it's always, we're far from done. We got more work to do. We're looking at the next thing. In Illinois, just to summarize it in the simplest way that I can, this mandate to cover treatment for infertility does have its limitations, right? There's exemptions to it. There's religious exemption. It's only for group insurance policies that are companies that are based in Illinois that have 25 or more employees. What was really interesting is Illinois, like I said, is viewed sometimes as this sort of gold standard. And then we had this ballot referendum on the November ballot in Illinois, and people were calling saying, "Why are they asking if infertility should be covered on the ballot? Why does that question even need to be asked? I thought we had this mandate." We do. However, a non-binding referendum basically just means give us some guidance here. What do the people of Illinois think? And the question was, should individual insurance plans cover treatment for infertility in Illinois?
Ooh,
I don't think you're going to be surprised that the yes on that was 72% in the state of Illinois.
that's
Uh,
amazing. I hadn't heard
yeah,
about that.
yeah. So it's a Like I said, it's non-binding, but this is what Democratic legislators, excuse me, in the state of Illinois are looking for. Something that they can bring to the floor and say 72% of Illinois voters have said that individual insurance plans should cover treatment for infertility. Let's act. Okay.
And so by individual insurance plan, what does that mean?
Individual
What is an
insurance plans,
individual insurance plan?
something purchased through the ACA to cover the treatment of infertility, something that is not provided by your employer in the
Now,
simplest
how
terms.
how amazing is that?
Yeah. I think we're a long way away from that. But also, recently in Illinois, we had this mandate, but it had a cap on it. It said that it would cover up to 4 IVF cycles. They've removed the cap. I think it's 6,
Oh,
but the argument was that you increase the chances of achieving a successful pregnancy and a live birth if you have more than 4 cycles covered. And so that was the efforts just this summer that Pritzker signed into law.
this is all amazing things. I don't know if I've shared with you, and I don't know that I've shared on the podcast before, but we started our fertility treatments when we were living in Illinois. Part of the reason that we were able to afford it was because of these fertility mandates. So I
Mm-hmm.
was an OBGYN resident, which means I'm making less than minimum wage. And we did our first round of IVF there, and it was covered under my employer, who was, I guess, the state of Illinois, because I was at University of Illinois. At that time, it did have exactly what you were saying before. So the definition of infertility was that you couldn't get pregnant with after a year of unprotected intercourse. So we had to meet that mark first. And it also had that limit of, I believe our insurance was either 4 or 6 cycles of IVF. And I remember both personally thinking, am I going to exhaust this? What will happen afterwards? How would we be able to afford treatment if we had to pay out of pocket? Because with that benefit, our cost for IVF was about $2,500. And that 2000 was because we had to pay for ICSI out of pocket. The
Mm-hmm.
500 was copays and medications. And most people in the country do not get to do a full IVF cycle for under $3,000. It's life changing. And to be able to do an egg retrieval when you're 27 versus after you saved up money and you're now 35 is a
Yep.
whole different ballgame.
Yep.
So the other thing that makes me think about is conversations that we would have in the clinics when people have just a limited number of chances and a limited number of cycles that are paid for. They make different decisions. So that's when they might be asking to transfer 2 embryos instead of 1. And 2 embryos is a higher risk pregnancy, higher risk situation than just 1. But if they know that there isn't a cap, then they might make
Yeah.
more safe decisions.
I think your audience probably may be keenly aware if they're patients at a fertility clinic right now, but the recommendation of a double embryo transfer is becoming a relic, right? Just because the data suggests that it's just as likely to achieve a single pregnancy with a single embryo transfer, or almost as likely as it is with a double embryo transfer. But if you transfer 2, you're obviously increasing the chances of it's more likely to achieve a multiple pregnancy versus a split embryo. Which, by the way, those numbers on split embryos are always a little higher than I imagine they would be.
There's always a chance. We
For
will, we will have an REI coming on soon to talk about double embryo transfer and whether or
Mm,
not that's a good idea. But in some people's
good.
calculations, just to put it out there, they're thinking I can get 2 for the price of 1. And is that how we should be thinking? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't,
You mentioned ICSI too. So was the
uh,
ICSI covered for you?
so
Maybe we
ICSI
should
does
define
not.
ICSI.
Yeah, so ICSI is intracytoplasmic sperm injection. So that's when the embryologist is looking underneath the microscope and they find like the one sperm that looks really good and take it and put it inside the egg. So usually the sperm will enter the egg on its own, but if there aren't a lot of sperm or there's a lot of abnormal sperm, sometimes they need help. And what we've shared is that we had both female and male infertility. So my husband had, as I would say, weird sperm. Every semen analysis was something different, either low concentration, the next one would be low morphology, the next one after that would be low, like progressive motility. So he really needed ICSI, and insurance denied it. We wrote to them, they still denied it, and then we paid out of pocket.
Mm.
Subsequently, after that, for other cycles, it was covered. They should have covered
Yeah.
it. They did.
There's more good news from Illinois.
Oh,
Let me share
yay.
this with you. Yeah. So this was, I think Governor Pritzker signed this in the fall, and it's not directly related to ICSI, but um, the expansion of the reproductive or the insurance code in Illinois now says that I'm going to read this: no group policy of insurance that provides pregnancy related benefits on or after January 1st, 2026. Okay, so this is in the future. The policy must contain coverage for the diagnosis and treatment of infertility. We knew that, including but not limited to IVF, embryo transfer, artificial insemination, gamete intrafallopian tube transfer, zygote intrafallopian tube transfer. The coverage shall include procedures to screen or diagnose a fertilized egg before implantation, including but not limited to pre-implantation genetic testing,
Wow.
which was always an out-of-pocket expense.
Yes.
So for that
Yes.
PGT testing, they're saying that these policies must now cover that to
Mm.
make sure that the embryos have been screened before they are transferred to increase the likelihood of a successful outcome.
Wow. Yes.
Very helpful
I'm sure that's resonating with some people right now. I've
if they
also
know
met
about it.
people who don't meet the definition of infertility, but they carry a genetic condition that could be screened out with certain pre-implantation genetic testing and screening. Because they don't meet the definition of infertility, it wouldn't cover the IVF portion. So, like, none of the IVF portion would be covered, but they would
Right.
cover the pre-implantation genetic screening. So, do you do testing on the pregnancy, so CVS or amniocentesis, versus do you spend $30,000 on IVF
Mm.
and then being able to test beforehand? There's just like lots of little issues and little nuances of things that aren't fully covered as it relates to becoming a parent these days.
Mm-hmm.
That brings us to some of the things that you are doing now,
Mm.
which is advocating for all of us. So, all
Yeah.
people who are wanting to become parents and need some sort of help and some sort of support. What type of
Um,
advocacy work are you doing now?
right now, we're focused on Federal Advocacy Day for Resolve in the spring. A lot of the fears that came with a change in the administration were clouded or overshadowed. You may hate the messenger, but the messenger who's going to go to the White House has said that he's going to make the government or insurance companies pay for IVF. I know that there are advocacy organizations everywhere that are going to be holding the administration's feet to the fire on that, to say, listen, this was not an empty campaign promise. This was something that a lot of infertility patients are going to be relying on. But let's act. In the past, what we've seen is a reaction to fear, particularly the state of Alabama. What my colleagues and I sometimes disagree on is my colleagues sometimes say we need to separate the abortion discussion from the infertility and IVF discussion. Can't do it. It is the
Oh,
same thing. They
yeah.
are so intertwined that if you close the door on one, you're closing the door on the other, potentially closing the door on another. We actually saw it in practice in Alabama. Alabama Supreme Court says embryos are children, and the destruction of an embryo could subject you to criminal or civil penalties. Alabama fertility clinics start closing immediately because
Overnight.
So we actually saw what happened. And so every other state has attempted to react in a similar way, right? Where in Illinois, we've said there is a shield here. There are fences, there's guardrails up over the around the state of Illinois to protect healthcare providers from that kind of liability. Okay. Now, this protection is only at the state level. And so this past spring, Tammy Duckworth from Illinois introduced the Right to IVF Act because they want to provide federal protection for healthcare providers and for patients who are pursuing IVF, because there may be or there will be destruction of embryos in the course of that process. I was fortunate. I was a guest of Senator Schumer, sat in the Senate gallery for that vote on the Right to IVF Act. Duckworth goes up. Senator Schatz from Hawaii, was very emphatic about what we've seen in Alabama. We can't have this happen anywhere else. We need to protect all citizens of the United States. We needed a significant number of votes from one particular political party, and we only got 2. And so the bill did not pass. Those federal protections did not pass, and they introduced it again. One political party says this is fear-mongering. IVF is accessible. No, it wasn't for patients in Alabama. Even temporarily, you can upset a cycle and you can lose the opportunity, your one chance to have a child.
And it could
And
really be
so
your one chance if you
one
are
chance,
someone who is about to undergo cancer treatment
yeah,
and you're on that emergency IVF cycle and you're supposed to do your egg retrieval on Tuesday and this law goes into effect on Friday. It's not
yeah,
happening. And you don't have that
yeah,
opportunity because you have to move on with your cancer treatment and that opportunity is
yeah.
gone forever.
A wiser person once told me, don't expect to get a passage of a bill the first time you introduce it. It takes time. The average life cycle of a bill is about 7 years, right, from introduction to passage. And the image I have in my head when it comes to advocacy is a nail getting pounded into a board. And every year you pound it a little bit further into the board, and eventually you have a nail that's flush with that board. Okay. And so that's my feeling when it comes to advocacy, not just preserving what we've, for the last 6, 7 years of advocacy for me has been about expanding access to care. Now we're just trying to cement the floor, right? We don't want the floor to go any lower, but we're also sprinkling it in with expansion of benefits. We've even seen federal employees recently have had an expansion of infertility benefits if you're on the federal employees program, which was a huge win. And so I think looking towards the spring, towards Advocacy Day, Resolve is always looking for people to come and share their stories. I think a lot of people who want to advocate and they want to say, this is really important to me, and you're the ones that can make these decisions that can give me a family. And my approach on advocacy has always been to try to simplify what the approach should be. Don't be overwhelmed or don't be intimidated by the congressperson from your district or the meeting with a United States senator. It's very simple, I think. You go into a meeting and you answer 2 questions. Why am I here and how can you help me? Okay. And I think it's fairly simple to answer the first question. Why am I here? Because you just tell your story. You tell people in power why they can help you. Okay. For example, my pitch to Congress has always been, my wife and I were extremely fortunate to have some infertility benefit provided to us by our employer. But it just seems incredibly unfair that because of who we worked for or where we lived, we had access to care that others don't. Why does the insurance company get to choose who should have a family? That makes no sense. And so back to the 2 questions, why am I here? You tell them your story. I've been through 3 cycles of IVF. I've paid out of pocket. It's a disease. The World Health Organization has defined what I have as a disease of infertility, which affects 1 in 6 people. Excuse me, Congresswoman, 1 in 6 of your constituents is going to tell you the same story that I'm telling you right now. And they vote, you know? And so the why you are here is the story that you have experienced. How can you help me? The second question, How can you help me? I need you to co-sponsor Bill 123. What that's going to do is it's going to expand coverage for people like me. It's going to give me the opportunity to have a family. These are all we hear about lawmakers is pro-family, pro-family, pro-family. These are pro-family issues. We want to have a family. And so those are incredibly effective meetings. I'll give you one example. I met with a congressman from Oklahoma. I'm not going to tell you who he is. I'll just tell you he was the least likely to be a receptive audience. And so I'm giving him my why. Why am I here? And he says, Ryan, you don't need to go any further. Let me tell you why. I have one child. I have a 25-year-old son, and he was born as the result of IVF. Okay, Congressman, then you're going to co-sponsor this bill, aren't you? I've got to run it through the Appropriations Committee, and I got to make sure that we've got the funding for this type of thing. These are your constituents. They need your help. They're asking you for their help. Help them. And so we don't get movement that day, right? All of a sudden, we might get a co-sponsor on a bill that we didn't expect, and you start to see movement there. I think the next 4 years, the fears that some people have they are real. But as I mentioned at the top of this segment here, there were a lot of promises that were made. And I know organizations like Resolve are going to hold their feet to the fire on that.
Yes. Yes. I love everything that you said, especially in talking to our Congress people. One conversation may not move the needle, but we have to repeat that same messaging over and over again. And that's exactly what we do in medicine. If you smoke cigarettes and we're trying to get you to stop smoking cigarettes, every visit you come in, we're telling you about the health consequences and trying to gauge how likely you are to stop smoking. And eventually you're going to get to that point, and then we have the resources ready. Or sometimes it's just hearing it from a different person. Sometimes a different messenger, a different way of saying things resonates with a person. And your Congress member may be waiting to hear that message from you. You have a unique story, you have a unique way of telling it, and only you can do that. And by sharing your story and your plea, your ask could be what tips somebody over the edge. Definitely
Yeah.
welcome you to reach out to your congressperson. You don't have to wait for Advocacy Day. Advocacy Day is one day out of the year, but we have 365 or 364 other days for you to have an impact. And
Yeah,
other thing that really resonated is that fertility is an equalizer. People from all walks of life, all different political thoughts, all different levels of economy can face medical issues and do face infertility. And it's something that people understand. People understand the drive to be a parent, even if they've never faced infertility. If they want to have a child, or they know somebody who wants to have a child, or they know someone who couldn't, it's something that's easy for people to understand. So don't be afraid of sharing your story.
Small plug. The registration for Advocacy Day is open on Resolve's website, resolve.org. You should sign up, even if you don't want to speak, even if you just want to be there to support because you've had a family member who's experienced infertility, or you have a friend who's experiencing infertility, or if you just want to see what it's like, you should do that. There will be others on the calls that are going to share their stories. You don't have to. If you just want to show up to support the community, you can do that. I encourage anyone who is interested in advocacy or interested in sharing their story because they think it can have a real impact to sign up for Federal Advocacy Day with Resolve. But you make a very good point. Advocacy happens 365 days a year. And in fact, the most important thing about Advocacy Day is the day after, because that's when we're following up through the next Advocacy Day. Congresswoman, your staff member said that you were going to take a look at the information that we've provided. Have you had an opportunity to do that? If you haven't, I'll check back in 3 days, something like that. I've never met a more persistent group than the group of infertility advocates through Resolve. It's funny because I've seen a lot of the same people over the years that I've met with, whether I know that if I'm going into a meeting with a very specific member of Congress, that they're going to be the one at the meeting. or I know that their staff is going to be at the meeting, right? You learn the patterns of who's going to be at those meetings. And one thing that's very clear to them, we're never going away. We are going to be coming back every single year and every day in between until equal coverage is fertility quality is a very important mission.
Yes, agreed. I couldn't agree more. This has been fantastic. Do you have any last words about advocacy or surrogacy or insurance or anything for people that might be listening? If they don't take away anything from this
Yeah.
episode except what you're about to say, what would you like them to take away?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I'm trying not to overwhelm anyone. And I think the way to not overwhelm patients or someone who may be considering advocacy is to just say that there's tons of resources out there to educate yourself about the path forward. The path that my wife Lindsay and I took was we went straight to resolve.org. We wanted to understand, what are the laws? What is the insurance coverage? How do I get involved? Who can help me? Are there support groups? That's a big one. Resolve is a really big one. But obviously, there's many other resources out there. When it comes to surrogacy, obviously, you're always going to need a lawyer. So make sure you talk to a lawyer who's licensed in your state first. But that may not be the lawyer that you're eventually going to need, because the law that governs your arrangement may be the law of the state where the surrogate lives, if it's different. So I would start with a surrogacy attorney or third-party reproduction attorney in your state as it relates to surrogacy. But when it comes to trying to find resources and trying to find ways to get involved or to look for support, I'd go to resolve.org. I'll leave it at that.
All right. Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you for being so generous with your time, sharing your story, and all the advocacy work that you're doing.
It's been my pleasure.